law, George Conway. George, I want to start with you. The Supreme Court, that's where this feels like it's going at this point. How do you think they're going to rule? I know we got to be careful about trying to get into their heads, but you've been there.
Look, I mean, I think that the reasoning of the Federal Circuit is absolutely ironclad. I mean, you cannot, no one has ever used that statute, whose name I can't remember, it's an IAEPA or whatever, to impose taxes before, to impose tariffs before. I mean, all it talks about is the regulation of commerce, and it's very, very vague in that regard. And there's an old kind of an adage that's applied to interpreting statutes, congressional statutes, which is Congress doesn't hide elephants in mouse holes. In other words, if it really wanted to give this massive power to the president, it would have been more explicit about it. And you just don't see it on the face of the statute. And I think the Supreme Court's going to ultimately affirm it, although I think the Federal Circuit did a smart thing by staying its decision so that the Supreme Court doesn't go in on it kind of half-assed, which it's been doing in a lot of other situations.
Giving it some time to breathe.
Yeah, give it some time to breathe and not feel like they have to make a decision immediately to protect the government from its own folly here.
And just for our viewers, this is the International Emergency Economic Powers Act of 1977, which I feel like we're going to be here.
JD 2025. She's back with her law degree.
Exactly. That's what she was.
Play a lawyer on television. But it feels like we'll be hearing a lot about that this week. I mean, Neera, in the meantime, Trump Truth Socialed last night. Actually, let's pull that up quickly to see the president's response. He said that all tariffs are still in effect. Today, a highly partisan appeals court incorrectly said our tariffs should be removed, but they know the USA will win in the end. If these tariffs ever went away, it will be a total disaster for the country. He continues, and thank you for your attention to this matter. I mean, what are we bracing for?
The end of the country.
In the interim.
How did we make it this far, right?
I don't know. I sort of feel like people would be really relieved if this tax wasn't really on them anymore. I mean, that's one of the ironies of this whole situation, which is the tariffs are Donald Trump's amongst his least popular policies. They are unpopular because they are taxes. They are taxes on every American, but they are disproportionately borne by working class people. And so, I think this is one of the issues that actually wedges even his own supporters. He has less support on this issue than any other issue. So, I mean, fundamentally, the Constitution says Congress has the power to raise taxes. Tariffs are a tax. This is firmly an Article I congressional power. I think it is a very clear case. But I also think that the more Donald Trump spends on tariffs, the weaker his economic support is, and that is a real political problem for him. So if I were in the White House, if I were one of his advisors, I'd be sort of secretly sighing, having some relief here by the courts, but, have at it, keep trying to raise taxes on the American people.
George, do you think, though, that this emboldens Congress at all? They see that the court is ruling this way. That maybe they'll take back some of their tariff powers because they ceded a lot of those powers and others.
No.
No.
Short
answer, no. Easy question.
I've said this more. I've said this more in the scandal context, but when you're talking about Republicans in Congress, you can never, particularly in the Senate, but we talk about Republicans in Congress, you're never going to go broke betting on them to be spineless.
Yeah.
Let's switch gears a little bit.
Speaking of.
Speaking of, there have been a lot of town halls, just public appearances in general, where Republicans who are brave enough now to go out in public have been met with lots of things. I want to play this Susan Collins getting booed at a ribbon-cutting ceremony. It's very funny. It says no transcript because it's just boos and heckles. Let's watch. And now let's take a look at Barry Moore, representative from Alabama, escaping out of a town hall after getting heckled so much.
So the process for a citizen and a non-citizen are different.
The Fifth and 14th Amendments allow for it. The Supreme Court has backed it many times. Shame. Shame. Bye, Felicia.
That 90s movie by Felicia, still giving to this day. Neera, we've talked about this over and over again, that we've watched Republicans get booed, but do we think it actually translates into votes easily? It feels like Democrats are going to have to do something with this energy.
Well, I mean, I think there's a lot of news on this topic. Joni Ernst decided not to run for re-election. Perhaps one of the reasons why she decided not to run for re-election is she faced a town hall in which people said to her, people are going to die from your vote. And she said, we're all going to die. Mm-hmm. And I think that she looked at the polls. There was a poll out this week showing that she was being beaten by one of her Democratic opponents, Zach Walz. And I think she really looked at that and said, why am I going to run again? So I think there's a lot of talk of the political prowess of the president, but when you look at what's happening with these town halls, for those of us who remember the Tea Party, the anger at these town halls is so much greater. The reason why Susan Collins had that experience is in part because she has refused to have town halls. So people literally went to this event and there was a ribbon cutting, where they expected it to be very nonpartisan. And people were so angry that they, basically hijacked the event because there was no other way to express their concern to her. And I think people should recognize that there's incredible anger. Republicans want to say these are all, some interest group back. This is actual Americans angry at the actions of these members of Congress. And that, I think, is one of the reasons why Donald Trump is trying to avoid the election by redistricting.
Well, and actually, I think let's take a look, if we can, at the Quinnipiac poll to see where voters actually are on some of Trump's top issues. When we look at them, I mean, sending troops to D.C., the economy, trade, crime, these are things that voters are all disapproving of. Those
90 years ago that Congress can do that. This is becoming a showdown as to whether this reason's a good enough reason. And I think her argument is that it's pretextual. Her lawyers are saying, listen, you manufactured a reason so that the president can control monetary policy. That's a really novel question, Pam. It's really thorny. I don't know that she gets this trial on that question of whether she can keep her job or not. Mm-hmm. And in the meantime, I think her reputation is being smeared, which is unfortunate. As far as the legal implications, at the end of the day, this Supreme Court is very clear on broad executive power, broad presidential power, particularly when it comes to employees within the chain of command to the president.
I want to bring you in, sure, Michael, because, if the president can fire a Fed governor, which, as we noted, has not been done before, where do you see the limits of the president's power being?
I mean, look, I think you got to have some limitations. I mean, I understand the arguments from the executive. I'm not necessarily fond of how this is happening with Dr. Cook, and I'm referring to her as Dr. Cook because she has a PhD in economics. If the president disagrees with the monetary decisions of some of the Fed board members, I understand. I get it. I've been calling for us to drop and lower interest rates for months now. For a number of reasons. So I'm in agreement there. I think you can do that without smearing her. I mean, I've heard folks calling her DEI hire. This is a woman who went to Spelman College. She went to Oxford. She has a PhD from UCLA Berkeley. This is clearly someone who's qualified for the role. And I'm all for intellectual disagreements and debates. That's the part of politics that I enjoy the most. But I think we can have those disagreements without smearing her. And the undertones really, really bothered me. You want to fire somebody, fire them and move on. You should be able to do that without all of the baggage that comes along with it. I'm not a big fan of that.
Let me just follow up on that. Why do you think that President Trump then targeted her specifically?
Well, this is what I was told. I reached out to a couple of folks today, and what I was told was they looked into multiple people and that apparently others may be coming soon at some point. So it may not just stop with Dr. Cook. There may be another one or two individuals appointed by President Biden, as she was, who may also find themselves in the crosshairs of the administration pretty soon.
But that goes to, I think, a very important underpinning of this in terms of the why this is really happening. Because there's the legal case, which who knows how that's going to shake out. But then there's the politics. This is about controlling monetary policy. He tried to go after the Fed chair. That wasn't working. The markets didn't like it. Business leaders did not like it. And so now he's trying to basically control the people who control decisions about monetary policy. Why? Because he does not have a plan, from my perspective, our perspective, the Democrats, to deal with the economy. I mean, he was elected, number one reason, get costs down. Costs are not down. Things are not affordable. And inflation is up. So instead of some kind of policy around how he's going to deal with that, over and over and over again, we hear about the tariffs, and we hear him blaming the Fed for not lowering rates. That seems to be it. And so, this sort of strategy, and I think what Shermichael says sort of confirms it. So it's not just going to be her. He wants to have,
we have to independently report
potentially,
that out,
potentially could be an attempt to try to control all of the members and to try to, and the administration has talked about wanting to have that kind of control of lots of the different levers of government, which I think, again, at some point there are Americans who say, I'm not comfortable with that. That is not the Constitution. That is not the country that that's not our values in this country. And the way he's going about it, as with so many things, is just, what about due process? What about, the fact that she has said it was a clerical error. What about her opportunity to make her case before you go ahead and smear her?
Hello guys, you wouldn't believe this. A federal court just ruled that Donald Trump's tariff, his signature economic weapon, might have been illegal all along. That's right. The judge said Trump may have abused a law that was never meant to give him this kind of power. And now, this case is racing straight to the Supreme Court. Trump, of course, is furious. On Truth Social, he blasted the CM, warning that if tariffs are removed, it would be a total disaster for America. But here is the twist. Most Americans actually hate these tariffs. Why? Because they are just taxes. Hitting working families the hardest. Not China, not foreign companies, US. And this ruling exposes something Trump doesn't want to admit. Even his own supporters are divided. Tariffs are one of his least popular policies. And now the courts may rip them away from him. So the question is, does this mark the beginning of the end for Trump's strongman economic image? Or will he find a way to twist the system back in his favor? Either way, buckle up. This fight is just getting started. Stay tuned with us. Thank you for watching.